Welcome back to our Chosen Reviews. Today we're going to be looking at episodes 2 and 3. So if you haven't watched those yet, go ahead and check those out. I'll post the link to those down below. So just remember there's some talking before and after the episode. So just kind of fast forward to the episode. That's what I'll be talking about. By all means, you can watch the rest, but I'm not going to necessarily address any of that. Episode 2 begins with a flashback, this time to the land around the Sea of Galilee in the year 948 BC. So this would have been around the time of King Solomon. But then we flash again to that same area, specifically Capernaum in 26 AD. So the time of the ministry of Jesus. Capernaum is a city right on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee where Jesus will conduct a lot of his ministry. So that's where the series is really setting up to be focused on, at least for now, is Capernaum. We then see Mary, no longer called Lilith, but Mary, and she's completely restored, and the scenes are a little bit brighter around her. We see Matthew again dealing with the Romans, and then we're finally introduced to James and John. So this episode is going to begin to introduce us to some of the other ones that Jesus would call to be apostles. Now, at least the beginning of this episode focuses on what happened to Mary, what happened to this woman. So Nicodemus, being a member of the Sanhedrin, is called in by the Sanhedrin to figure out what in the world happened. That Nicodemus went to the district where this Lilith was, and now she's restored. So they want to know what in the world happened with her. And I'm telling you, just like I said in the first review, Eric Avari, who plays Nicodemus, is so good in this series. Without even saying it, you can see the expression in his face that he's searching for something. He doesn't know what he's searching for. He knows something greater is on the scene, but he can't figure it out. So finally, Nicodemus runs into Mary, and he calls her Lilith, and she kind of runs away from him, and she says that she goes by Mary now, and they have this back and forth about what in the world happened. At first, he thinks it's something he did, but she reveals that it was nothing, in fact, that he did. And again, trying to figure it out. Mary has one of the best lines here, and again, it's not a verse in the scriptures necessarily, but it speaks so powerfully to the truth of what happens when Jesus claims us as his own, just like he had said to Mary. She said, "I was one way, and now I am completely different. The thing that happened in between was him." It's at the very beginning of the episode, and it's such a powerful thing. But this is how we're going to see people. This is how we see people in the Gospels. How people were one way, and then they were completely different, and the only thing that happened in between was him. So a very, very powerful scene there between Nicodemus and Mary. Then we shift kind of back to Peter, who's been out all night trying to sell out these merchants to the Romans. Andrew's going to wind up a little upset because they're brothers. They know these people very, very well. But another funny scene, Peter comes home. Everybody's preparing for the Sabbath, and he comes home, and his wife, who is called Eden in this series, is preparing for a meal, and she's chopping up this food. And as Peter comes in after he's been out all night, the chopping gets louder and louder and louder and faster and faster and faster. Right? She knows something's up, but she doesn't know what. And that's another thing in the series that's kind of striking is we begin to see these relationships. And again, these relationships aren't played out necessarily in the Bible, but it does, it does kind of make these apostles more real as we begin to see these relationships play out. The interesting shift after this is once you get to these Sabbath dinners on the Sabbath, you see Nicodemus is there in town, so he's about to have a dinner, and my ear is tuned to this. You can start to hear these lines that that are mentioned by Jesus later. And I really hope that when these do come back up, that Jesus specifically teaches these things, and they just don't let them hang out and not resolve. Because a couple of guys come into Nicodemus's house, and one of them kind of whispers and says, "Try to get a seat near the head of the table." So remember, when Jesus teaches in his ministry, he says, when you get invited, don't sit up front, right? Sit at the lower place, for it's better to be told to come up here. So I really hope they will do something with that scene. We shift then to Mary's Shabbat, Mary's Sabbath dinner in contrast. And you begin to see kind of, in contrast to Nicodemus with the Pharisees, the Sabbath with tax collectors and sinners, right? So we're introduced to James the younger, and Thaddeus, and then of course there's a knock at the door, and it's Jesus. So one of the things that's interesting about the series is they'll say that it's supposed to be all about Jesus, but in 2 episodes we're introduced to Jesus very, very briefly at the end of the first one, and very, very briefly at the end of the second one. And I know there's a lot of character development that goes on here, and I'll get more on that in just a moment. But the interesting scene here is when Jesus shows up, they ask him his name because he hasn't revealed his name yet. And he says, "I'm Jesus from Nazareth." And one of the guys says, "Oh, apparently something good can come from can come from Nazareth." So again, more biblical plugs there, which is kind of nice to see. And then finally, kind of the pan out shot at the end is Peter standing on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, looking for those merchants who are fishing on the Sabbath, who are evading taxes because they're fishing on the Sabbath. Again, not a biblical thing, but it's kind of driving the plot along here. So again, this episode is very much about character development. The character development, again, is not necessarily based on the scriptures, and honestly, there's not a lot in this episode that comes from the pages of the scriptures, right? I mean, character development is important, and it will drive the narrative here. But keep in mind, there are only 8 episodes in this first season, and at the time there was only one season. It's completely crowdfunded. So if you're spending 2 out of 8 episodes, and we've only seen Jesus for a minute or two, I'm wondering what's really driving here. But still, it's I'm hooked, just like I was the first time going through it. I'm interested to kind of let my eyes lay on this a second time and see other reactions. Another thing that I really, really like about the series in general, and especially about this episode, is the humor. Uh, so often we think of Bible characters and we don't think about humor at all in the Bible, but the Bible is full of satire, full of irony, full of good humor. So I'm really glad that they, even though it's their own writing, that they're actually pulling that out, because it's in that sense, it's very, 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 very biblical. The other thing is, we often think of Bible characters being old, right? When you think of Peter or whoever, you kind of think of them like Moses, right? White hair, beard, the whole thing. But you're really seeing them as they were in Jesus's ministry, young men, right? In Jesus's ministry. So that's neat to see also. One of the issues I guess I have with this episode, and you could say it's nitpicking or whatever, is that when Jesus shows up to the Sabbath in Mary's house, right? Jesus is a rabbi, and Jesus insists that Mary lead the Sabbath, which in the 21st century is kind of progressive in all of this, but would not have happened in the first century. So that's just kind of one of those things that isn't necessarily concerning, but in seeing with the way Jesus deals with people, I wonder how that will play out in the future. If Jesus, rather than the scriptures say, he teaches with authority and not as one of the scribes, I wonder if they'll show Jesus kind of handing stuff off because he doesn't do that. So that's episode 2. Very, very good. Kind of catches you, leaves Peter there at the shore of the Sea of Galilee, kind of driving you into the next episode. Uh, but very much unlike the connection that we have from episode 1 to 2, episode 3, we don't see Peter at all by the sea, right, being approached by those Romans with torches. It doesn't pick up there at all. Instead, we get Jesus, which maybe I was complaining about in episode 1 and 2, but here he is, and now I'm complaining that they didn't continue the story. So what gives, right? No, this episode is about Jesus. He's out in this camp, not in town. Again, nothing from this episode comes from the pages of scriptures. It's simply moving along the plot. But it's a good episode, right? It shows Jesus encountering children. So the episode begins. Jesus is out, in his camp, and he's making stuff out of wood. And a little girl stumbles upon his camp, and she hides from him. So the next day, she brings a friend, and they hide. And but you can't hide from Jesus, right? Jesus knows that they're there, and he starts making noises that resembles what happens when you have a stomach issue to draw them out, right? The kids think it's hilarious, but you don't necessarily think of Jesus making these noises. And I don't know that that's necessarily the most helpful, but not that Jesus wouldn't have fun or all of these things. But again, 3 episodes in, and really our first full encounter with Jesus is him making noises like you're having stomach issues. So they laugh and they come out, and day by day they show this little girl bringing more and more children to hang out with Jesus. They ask him if it's okay, and he says, "Oh yeah, I've got a little bit of work to do, but you can come." And Jesus is allowing the kids to make things with him, and all along he's teaching them, and these are such powerful scenes as well. One of the things he does is he teaches them a song, and it may seem like it's just a random song that he's teaching them, but it's not. It's the 133rd Psalm. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. Okay, so he's singing this with them. All the kids are singing with him. Now, I bring up that it's the 133rd Psalm because that's in the section of the Psalms that's called the Psalms of Ascents, right? So these are the Psalms that the people would have sung and chanted as they were going up to Jerusalem. This episode is very much wrapping up Jesus's time out away from people before he's going to be starting his ministry. So not that he's necessarily going up to Jerusalem at this point, but he is actually about to go into the communities where these people are. Another thing that really stuck out to me, there are these little scenes. Jesus makes a key, a lock and a key, and when he finishes it, he says, "It is good." Or you think about going back to creation, when God creates things, and he always says, "It is good." So he creates this lock and this key, and he says, "It is good." A little bit later on, though, it's a little thing. He is teaching the children, and he asks them to recite the Shema, which is from Deuteronomy 6. And after they finish, he says, "Beautiful, very good." Think about back to creation, okay? When Jesus makes everything, he always says it is, or when God creates everything, it is good, it is good, it is good. And then when he creates man, he says, "Behold, it is very good." So in dealing with the things of creation, it is good. When dealing with the children, very good. So it's just a subtle thing, but it's another one of those biblical connections that we can make. So Jesus, again, is preparing for the ministry. He's teaching the kids. Excellent scenes, but you can tell that he's hinting to these children that he's got some place to be. He's got something to do. So at the very end, he leaves his camp. The little girl shows up the last day, and no one is there. But Jesus has left her a note and made for her kind of this little play set that's looks like a little barn with horses, so she can play on it, or with her little doll on this thing. It's a really really, really nice nice touch. So again, I'm anticipating, and I don't remember with complete clarity, but this scene with Peter standing beside the Sea of Galilee and the Romans showing up with torches. We got to pick back up there at some point to kind of see. We've got to see Jesus begin his ministry. Again, not too much outside of the characters is actually coming from the pages of the scriptures so far. So you can tell that the man who created this is kind of creating these characters in his own image, not necessarily from the scriptures. And again, not that that's wrong. He's told us very clearly from the very beginning what he's doing, and it is kind of a nice thing. I'm still hooked, right? I want to see how everything comes together again. From my experience so far, since this is my second time through this first season, I'm picking up more. So it's one of those things that's from my perspective meant to be watched and rewatched another time. So that's something that sticks out to me so far. Next time we're going to take up episodes 4 and 5. Right, this was 2 and 3. So episodes 4 and 5 we'll take up next time. So thanks for joining me for this review. I hope that you're enjoying this series as I am, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.